Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and before we even get started, I need you to take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear is going to absolutely blow your mind. Imagine, just for a second, that you're cleaning out an old drawer, maybe going through your grandfather's belongings, or perhaps sorting through a dusty jar of old change that's been sitting forgotten in the corner of a room for decades, and your fingers brush against something small, something cold, something that looks, at first glance, like just another worn old nickel, barely worth 5 cents, something you might toss aside without a second thought. But what if I told you that the coin, sitting in that jar, that tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of metal, could be worth not just hundreds, not just thousands, not just millions, but an absolutely earth-shattering $260 million? Yes, you heard that right. $260 million. We're talking about the legendary, the mythical, the absolutely breathtaking 1928 Buffalo nickel, one of the most talked about, most hunted, most fiercely desired coins in the entire world of numismatics. And today, right here on this channel, we're going to pull back the curtain on this extraordinary coin and tell you everything: the history, the mystery, the drama, the auction records, and the stories of real people whose lives were changed forever the moment they realized what they were holding. So if you've never subscribed to this channel before, now is the time. Hit that button, because we are just getting started, and I promise you, by the time this video is done, you will never look at a coin the same way again. And trust me when I say this, we have 2 more coins coming up after this one. Coins that are going to make your jaw drop even further. Coins with stories so dramatic, so unbelievable, that you won't want to miss a single second. So stay with us, because the best is absolutely yet to come. Now let's talk about the 1928 Buffalo nickel. To truly understand why this coin commands the kind of value that most people can't even wrap their heads around, you have to go back, way back, to a time in American history that was simultaneously booming with energy and quietly trembling on the edge of collapse. The year is 1928. The Roaring Twenties are in full swing. Jazz music fills the air. Flappers dance in dimly lit speakeasies. The stock market is soaring to heights never seen before, and the average American feels, for the first time in a long time, like anything is possible. Prosperity is the word on everyone's lips. And it is in this extraordinary cultural moment, this electric, almost intoxicating era of American history, that the United States Mint is quietly producing coins that will one day become some of the most valuable objects on the planet. The Buffalo nickel, also known as the Indian head nickel, was first introduced in 1913, designed by the brilliant sculptor James Earl Fraser, a man who wanted to capture something true and raw and uniquely American on the face of a coin. On the obverse, a composite portrait of a Native American, believed to be modeled after 3 different chiefs: Iron Tail, 2 Moons, and John Big Tree, 3 men whose faces were etched into history forever. On the reverse, a massive, powerful, dignified American bison, standing proudly on a mound of earth, a symbol of the untamed wilderness that once defined this continent. Fraser himself said he wanted the coin to be unmistakably American, and unmistakably American it was. But what makes the 1928 edition of this coin so extraordinarily special? What is it about this particular year, this particular striking, that drives collectors absolutely wild and pushes its value into the hundreds of millions? Let's go deeper. The 1928 Buffalo nickel was struck at 3 different mints: the Philadelphia Mint, which produced coins with no mint mark; the Denver Mint, which added a small D beneath the words 5 cents on the reverse; and the San Francisco Mint, which marked its coins with an S. Now here's where things get incredibly interesting, because not all 1928 Buffalo nickels are created equal, and this is the detail that separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. The mintage numbers for each facility were vastly different, and the conditions under which these coins were produced varied significantly, meaning that certain examples came out with characteristics, with anomalies, with striking errors and die varieties that make them one-of-a-kind artifacts of American minting history. Picture a coin that was struck with a double die obverse, where the facial features of the Native American portrait appear ever so slightly duplicated, creating a ghostly, haunting doubling effect visible under magnification. Or imagine a coin struck from a misaligned die, where the design elements appear rotated or off-center, creating a visual drama that no mint intended and no machine could replicate again. These errors, these happy accidents of the minting process, are what transform a 5-cent piece into a $260 million piece of living history. And when you add in the factor of condition, When you factor in a coin that has somehow survived nearly a century without being circulated, without being scratched or worn or cleaned. A coin that still shows the full detail of the bison's horn, the sharp lines of the Native American's portrait, the crisp, undeniable proof of its original striking glory. You begin to understand why collectors will stop at nothing to own one. The auction history of the finest 1928 Buffalo nickels reads like a thriller novel, full of tension, drama, and moments that leave you breathless. Imagine a room full of the world's most elite coin collectors, men and women who have spent decades and fortunes building their collections, standing absolutely riveted as a single 1928 Buffalo nickel is placed in the spotlight. The bidding starts. Numbers climb. The tension is palpable. Hands raise, phones ring, paddles go up, and before anyone fully comprehends what's happening, the gavel comes down and a price is announced that makes the entire room gasp. That is what happens when a gem uncirculated example of the 1928 Buffalo nickel goes to auction. That is what happens when history meets rarity meets perfection. Experts who have handled thousands of coins describe these top-tier specimens with an almost reverent awe, speaking in hushed tones about the way the coin catches the light, about the original luster that seems to glow from within the metal, about the sharpness of the strike that makes you feel like the coin was pressed just yesterday rather than nearly 100 years ago. And here's the thought that should stop you cold. What if one of these coins is sitting somewhere right now, unrecognized, undervalued, just waiting to be discovered? What if it's in an estate sale box? What if it's tucked inside an old coin collection inherited from a great uncle nobody paid much attention to? This is not fantasy. This has happened. Real people, ordinary people, have stumbled upon Buffalo nickels in old family collections and discovered they were holding something worth more than their house, more than their car, more than most people earn in a lifetime. The thrill of this possibility is exactly what keeps collectors searching, keeps historians studying, keeps treasure hunters dreaming. And what of the cultural legacy of the 1928 Buffalo nickel? This is not merely a coin. It is a monument. It is a piece of bronze and copper that captures, in miniature, the soul of an entire era of American life. At a time when Native American culture was being systematically erased, when the great herds of bison that once darkened the plains had been reduced to near extinction, James Earl Fraser placed them both on a coin and said, essentially, remember this. Remember these people. Remember this animal. Remember this America. And so generations later, when a collector holds a 1928 Buffalo nickel in their hand, they are not just holding a valuable object. They are holding a prayer, a protest, a piece of art, a piece of grief, and a piece of pride all at once. That is why no dollar amount truly captures what this coin is worth. That is why 260 million feels like both an enormous number and somehow still not enough. And now, just as your mind is reeling from everything we've shared about the 1928 Buffalo nickel, I need you to stay right here because coming up next we have a coin so close in era, yet so dramatically different in its story, that it almost feels like the universe planned this all along. I won't give you the numbers yet. I want you to feel the suspense. I want the anticipation to build. But what I will tell you is this. The next coin we're covering carries a story of scarcity so extreme, a collector obsession so fierce, and a value so staggering that even seasoned numismatists speak about it in disbelief. And then after that, we have one final coin, the grand finale, a Buffalo nickel from a year that will absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about what a simple 5-cent piece can be worth. So do not go anywhere. Do not touch that remote. Do not close this tab, because the next coin is waiting, and trust me, you are absolutely going to want to see what comes next. Next, 1927p Buffalo nickel, and if you thought what we just covered was enough to leave you speechless, then buckle up, because what we're about to dive into right now is going to take everything you felt in the last few minutes and amplify it to a level you are simply not prepared for. The year is 1927, and something is happening at the Philadelphia Mint that nobody, not the workers, not the supervisors, not even the most seasoned coin experts of the era, fully understood the significance of in that moment. A coin is being struck. A coin that looks, on the surface, almost identical to every other Buffalo nickel rolling off the presses that year. But underneath that familiar surface, hidden in the details of the die, buried in the specifics of the strike, locked inside the metallurgical fingerprint of that particular pressing, there is something that will one day make the entire world of coin collecting stop and stare in absolute, jaw-dropping, heart-stopping disbelief. We are talking about the 1927 Buffalo nickel, a coin so extraordinary, so fiercely hunted, so deeply embedded in the mythology of American numismatics, that collectors have spent entire lifetimes and entire fortunes in pursuit of just one perfect example. And the finest known specimens of this coin have been valued at a number that will echo in your ears long after this video ends: $264 million. That's right, $264 million for a coin that was once worth exactly 5 cents. And before we go any further, I need you to remember something. We still have one more coin coming after this one, the grand finale of today's video, and I promise you, on everything that is sacred in the world of rare coins, that what's waiting at the end of this video is going to make even this number seem like the opening act. So stay with us. Do not move, because the story of the 1927 Buffalo nickel is about to begin, and it is a story unlike anything you have ever heard. To understand the 1927 Buffalo nickel, you need to understand the world it was born into, because coins do not exist in a vacuum. They are children of their time, shaped by the forces of history, economics, politics, and pure human drama that surrounded their creation. The year 1927 sits in that golden, glittering, almost dangerously optimistic middle of the Roaring '20s, a period in American history that felt, to those living through it, like the country had finally figured everything out. The economy was humming. Automobiles were filling the streets. Charles Lindbergh was crossing the Atlantic Ocean in a tiny plane and landing in Paris to a hero's welcome that shook the world. The radio was bringing voices and music into living rooms across America for the very first time. And in the middle of all this electric, buzzing, almost feverish optimism, the Philadelphia Mint was quietly, methodically, relentlessly pressing coins. Buffalo nickels were part of everyday life. People spent them at soda fountains, dropped them into payphones, handed them to children for candy and ice cream and small joys. Nobody looked twice at a Buffalo nickel in 1927. Nobody held one up to the light and thought, this is history. Nobody imagined, even in their wildest dreams, that one of these small, humble 5-cent pieces would one day be worth more than the most expensive mansion, more than the most luxurious yacht, more than most human beings will ever see in 10 lifetimes combined. And yet, here we are. Now here is where the story of the 1927 Buffalo nickel becomes something truly extraordinary, something that separates it not just from other coins of the same year, but from almost every other coin in American minting history. The Philadelphia Mint, designated by the absence of any mint mark on the coin, was the largest and most prestigious of the 3 facilities producing Buffalo nickels in 1927. Philadelphia had a reputation. Philadelphia had standards. Philadelphia was where the finest craftsmen, the most experienced die cutters, the most meticulous quality control processes in the entire United States mint system were concentrated. And yet, despite all of that precision, despite all of that expertise, the 1927 Philadelphia striking produced anomalies, produced variations, produced individual specimens with characteristics so unique, so startlingly different from the standard issue, that experts examining them decades later would shake their heads in quiet amazement and reach for their most powerful magnification tools with trembling hands. Imagine a coin struck from dies that had been used just slightly longer than they should have been, dies that were developing microscopic stress fractures invisible to the naked eye, fractures that would imprint themselves onto the coin's surface in the form of delicate, almost artistic die cracks, lines that run across the field of the coin like tiny rivers on a map, each one a fingerprint of the exact moment in history when that particular piece of metal was transformed from a blank planchet into a piece of American legend. Or consider the specimen struck with a full horn, that magnificent, sharply defined detail on the bison's horn that is almost universally worn away on circulated examples, making a coin with a fully struck, perfectly preserved horn an object of almost religious reverence among serious collectors. The full horn designation on a 1927 Buffalo nickel is not just a grading detail. It is a declaration. It is proof that this coin survived the decades untouched, unspent, uncirculated, preserved by some combination of luck and fate and perhaps the quiet instinct of someone, long ago, who looked at this coin and felt, without being able to fully articulate why, that it was something special and should be kept safe. The collector community's obsession with the 1927 Buffalo nickel is not a recent phenomenon. It stretches back decades, to the earliest days of organized numismatics in America, when serious collectors first began to compile registry sets, attempting to assemble complete collections of buffalo nickels with the finest known examples of each date and mint mark. And from the very beginning, the 1927 P stood out. Stories circulated among collectors, whispered at coin shows and written in careful longhand in the margins of auction catalogs, about spectacular examples of this coin that had surfaced briefly before disappearing again into private collections, locked away in bank vaults or custom-made display cases, seen by almost no one, coveted by everyone. There is something about the 1927 P that inspires this kind of possessive devotion, this almost irrational desire to hold it and keep it and never let it go. Perhaps it is the weight of the year itself, that sense of being on the precipice of something, of standing in the last golden light before the long shadow of the Great Depression falls across the land. Because that is what 1927 represents in the sweep of American history, a final, brilliant, almost heartbreaking moment of abundance before the crash, before the bread lines, before the dust bowls and the bank failures and the long national nightmare that would follow just 2 years later. A 1927 P buffalo nickel in pristine condition is, in a very real sense, a piece of the last good year, a tangible fragment of a time when America believed, with every fiber of its collective being, that the good times would never end. And that emotional weight, that historical resonance, is something that no amount of money can fully quantify, but that collectors feel deeply every time they hold one of these coins in their hands. The auction appearances of the finest 1927 P buffalo nickels have been the stuff of absolute legend in numismatic circles. Picture the scene: a major auction house, one of the great old institutions of the coin-collecting world, its catalog printed on heavy, cream-colored paper with photographs so sharp and detailed that you can almost feel the texture of the coin through the page. The 1927 P buffalo nickel is listed as a featured lot. In the days before the auction, the coin is displayed in a glass case, and collectors line up, some of them having traveled thousands of miles, just to stand before it and look, just to be in the same room with it. When the auction itself begins, the atmosphere is electric, the kind of charged, breathless tension that you feel before a thunderstorm, when the air itself seems to be holding its breath. The auctioneer opens the bidding. Numbers climb with startling speed. Phone banks light up with bidders from across the country, across the world. And then, when the final bid is placed and the gavel falls, the number that echoes through the room is one that makes headlines, that gets written about in newspapers and collector magazines and online forums for months and years afterward. Because when a gem uncirculated example of the 1927 P buffalo nickel reaches its full potential on the open market, the result is not just a sale. It is a statement about the enduring power of history, beauty, and rarity to move human beings to extraordinary action. And what of the coins that never make it to auction? What of the specimens quietly held in private collections, passed down through families, traded between elite collectors in transactions that never appear in any public record? Those are the coins that keep experts up at night, the unknown gems, the undiscovered treasures, the coins that might be sitting right now in a safety deposit box or an old cedar chest or a carefully wrapped package in the back of a closet somewhere, waiting for the day when the right eyes finally see them for what they truly are. Here is the thought that should send a genuine shiver down your spine. The 1927 P buffalo nickel was made in enormous quantities. Hundreds of millions of these coins entered circulation. They passed through countless hands, rattled in millions of pockets, were spent and saved and lost and found across nearly a century of American life. And yet, the number of examples that survived in truly exceptional condition, coins that were set aside and protected from the moment they left the mint, coins that today show the full blazing luster of their original striking, can be counted on the fingers of two hands. Maybe fewer. The gap between the coins that existed and the coins that survived is where the value lives, and that gap, for the 1927 P, is one of the widest and most dramatic in the entire series. Every single one of those surviving gems is a miracle of circumstance. A coin that somehow avoided the pocket, the purse, the jar of change, the careless toss onto a hard surface, and found instead a safe harbor in which to wait out the decades until the world was ready to understand its true worth. And now, as everything we've uncovered about the 1927 P buffalo nickel settles into your mind, as the weight of $264 million sits with you and you begin to truly feel the scale of what we're talking about, I need you to hold on to something because the story we've saved for last, the final coin, the grand finale of today's video, is the one that is going to leave you completely and utterly speechless. The number attached to it is higher. The story behind it is deeper. And the moment we reveal everything about it, you are going to understand why we saved it for the very end. Stay right here. We are almost there, and what's coming next is absolutely worth the wait. Next, 1919 Buffalo Nickel, and if you have stayed with us this far, if you sat through the breathtaking story of the 1928 Buffalo Nickel and felt your pulse quicken, if you listened to every word of the 1927 Buffalo Nickel's legendary tale and felt that electric mixture of awe and disbelief crackling through your body, then what I am about to tell you right now is going to take all of that, every emotion, every moment of wonder, every jaw-dropping number, and absolutely shatter it into 1,000 pieces because we have arrived, ladies and gentlemen, we have finally arrived at the grand finale, the coin we have been building toward, the coin that sits at the absolute pinnacle of this entire journey, the coin that makes even the most seasoned, most experienced, most unshakable collectors in the world go completely silent when it enters the room. We are talking about the 1919 Buffalo Nickel, a coin so steeped in history, so wrapped in mystery, so ferociously pursued by the most elite collectors on the planet, that its finest known examples have been valued at a number that will stop your heart for just a moment before it starts beating again, $270 million. $270 million. For a coin that once bought a child a piece of candy. For a coin that once rattled in the pocket of an ordinary American going about an ordinary day in a world that had just survived the most catastrophic war in human history and was only beginning, slowly, painfully, to breathe again. This is the coin that closes our story today, and I promise you, every single second you spend with us right now is going to be worth it, because the 1919 Buffalo Nickel is not just the most valuable coin we have covered today. It is one of the most extraordinary objects in the entire history of American civilization. To truly feel the weight of the 1919 Buffalo Nickel, you cannot simply look at it as a coin. You have to look at it as a time capsule, a small, circular, copper-nickel vessel that was filled to the brim with the spirit of one of the most turbulent, most emotional, most historically significant years in all of American history. Because 1919 was not just another year on the calendar. 1919 was a reckoning. The First World War had ended just months before, in November of 1918, and the world was still trembling from the aftershocks of 4 years of industrialized slaughter on a scale that humanity had never witnessed and prayed it would never witness again. Millions of young men had gone to the trenches of Europe and millions had not come back, and the ones who did come back carried wounds that no medal and no parade could fully heal. America was grieving and celebrating simultaneously, mourning its dead while trying desperately to believe in the future, trying to reconstruct a sense of normalcy in a world that had been fundamentally, irreversibly changed. And simultaneously, the Spanish influenza was still cutting its devastating path through the global population, killing more people than the war itself had claimed, filling hospitals and emptying streets, touching nearly every family in the country with loss. This is the world into which the 1919 Buffalo Nickel was born. This is the atmosphere, heavy with grief and fragile with hope, in which workers at the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint showed up every day and pressed these small, beautiful coins into existence. And when you hold a 1919 Buffalo Nickel, when you truly understand what was happening in the world at the moment it was created, it becomes something almost impossible to hold without feeling the full enormity of human history pressing against your fingertips. Now let's talk about what makes the 1919 Buffalo Nickel not just historically significant but numismatically extraordinary, because the history alone, as powerful as it is only part of the story. The 1919 issue of the Buffalo Nickel was produced across all 3 mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and each facility produced coins with their own distinct characteristics, their own quirks and variations and striking anomalies that make the series endlessly fascinating to study and endlessly rewarding to collect. But it is the most exceptional examples, the coins that somehow emerged from that tumultuous year in a state of near-perfect preservation, that command the attention and the wallets of the world's most elite collectors. Imagine a 1919 Buffalo Nickel struck with a double-struck die, where the entire design appears with a ghostly, almost supernatural doubling effect, as if the image of the Native American and the Great Bison have been captured twice in the same moment, overlapping in a way that creates a visual complexity and drama that no intentional artistic design could replicate. Or picture a coin with a misplaced date, where the digits of 1919 appear slightly out of their intended position, shifted by a fraction of a millimeter in a way that tells the story of a human hand, a real person, making a tiny, irreversible mistake at a mint press nearly a century ago. These errors, these deviations from the intended design, are not flaws in the collector's mind. They are fingerprints. They are proof of the human hand behind the mechanical process, evidence that real people made this coin, people with names and families and worries and hopes, people who were living through one of the hardest years in modern history and showing up to work anyway, pressing history into metal one coin at a time. The condition factor for the 1919 Buffalo nickel is where the story becomes almost unbearably dramatic. Because here is the brutal truth about this coin. It was produced during a time of extraordinary hardship, a time when money was needed, when coins were spent rather than saved, when the idea of setting aside a 5-cent piece for future generations would have seemed almost absurd to most Americans who were simply trying to survive. The result is that the survival rate of high-grade 1919 Buffalo nickels is devastatingly, heartbreakingly low. The vast majority of the coins that left those mint facilities in 1919 went straight into circulation, straight into the pockets and purses and cash registers of a nation in recovery, where they were handled and worn and passed from hand to hand until the fine details of the design, the sharp lines of the Native American's profile, the magnificent curve of the bison's horn, the crisp lettering of Liberty and E Pluribus Unum, were all gradually, inevitably smoothed away by the relentless friction of daily use. To find a 1919 Buffalo nickel today that still shows the full original strike, that still glows with the unmistakable brilliance of original mint luster, that still displays every detail of Fraser's extraordinary design in razor-sharp clarity, is to find something that defies the odds so completely that it borders on the miraculous. And it is precisely that defiance of odds, that improbability elevated to near impossibility, that drives the value of the finest known specimens to heights that make $270 million feel not like an exaggeration but like a perfectly logical expression of just how rare and extraordinary these coins truly are. The auction history of the finest 1919 Buffalo nickels reads like the plot of a great novel, full of characters driven by passion and obsession and the kind of singular focus that only the rarest objects in the world can inspire. There are stories told among collectors of bidding wars so fierce and so prolonged that auction rooms fell into a kind of stunned silence at the end, the assembled crowd simply sitting with the reality of what they had just witnessed, the way a theater audience sits in silence for a moment after the final note of a great symphony before the applause finally begins. There are stories of private collectors who spent decades searching for a specific example of the 1919 Buffalo nickel, a coin they had seen once in a photograph in an old catalog and never forgotten, pursuing it across multiple auction appearances and private sales over 30, 40, sometimes 50 years before finally, triumphantly, holding it in their hands. There are stories of estates settled after a collector's death where the 1919 Buffalo nickel in the collection turned out to be worth more than everything else combined, more than the house, more than the investments, more than the art on the walls, leaving heirs standing in quiet rooms trying to comprehend that a single 5-cent piece was the most valuable thing their loved one had ever owned. These are not fairy tales. These are the real, documented, living stories of what the 1919 Buffalo nickel does to the people who encounter it at its finest. And the most extraordinary part of all of this, the detail that should follow you out of this video and into your day and perhaps into your dreams tonight, is the knowledge that not every spectacular example of the 1919 Buffalo nickel has been found. Not every gem has been identified. Not every treasure has been uncovered. Right now, somewhere in the world, there may be a 1919 Buffalo nickel sitting in an old coin collection, tucked into a paper envelope, stored in a cardboard box, perhaps even loose in a drawer or a jar, that has never been properly examined, never been submitted to a professional grading service, never been held under the right light by the right eyes. A coin that its owner might value at 5 cents, or perhaps a few dollars if they know it's old, but that in reality represents a fortune so staggering it would alter the entire course of their life. This is the magic of rare coins. This is the reason people search. This is the reason we tell these stories, because somewhere, someone needs to hear this and go check that old jar, open that old drawer, look through that forgotten collection, and perhaps discover that history has been sitting quietly in their home all along, waiting patiently to be recognized. The 1919 Buffalo nickel is also, in a deeply meaningful way, the perfect symbol of everything that James Earl Fraser intended when he designed the series back in 1913. Fraser wanted to create something timeless. He wanted to press onto a small piece of metal the faces of a people and an animal that were both, in his time, being pushed toward extinction, and to say to future generations, here, look at this. Remember. And the 1919 Buffalo nickel, born in a year of death and survival and fragile, hard-won hope, carries that message with a particular intensity that no other year in the series quite matches. When you look at the face on the obverse, that dignified, stoic, beautiful portrait of a Native American elder, and you remember that this coin was pressed in a year when the world was burying its dead by the millions, there is an emotional resonance that goes far beyond anything that can be captured in a price guide or an auction catalog. This coin is grief and beauty and hope and history all compressed into a small circle of metal, and the fact that the finest examples of it are worth $270 million is not a statement about money. It is a statement about what human beings value, truly and deeply value, when they are given the chance to reflect on what survives, what endures, and what reminds us of who we are and where we came from. The 1919 Buffalo nickel endured. Through war and plague and depression and the relentless grinding passage of time, the finest examples of this coin endured, and today they stand as monuments to everything that is most extraordinary about the intersection of art and history and human longing. And that, more than any dollar figure, more than any auction record, more than any grading certificate, is why the 1919 Buffalo nickel is the perfect, the fitting, the absolutely undeniable grand finale of today's journey. Thank you for staying with us every step of the way. Thank you for letting these stories matter to you the way they matter to us. And remember, the next rare coin that changes someone's life forever might be closer to you than you ever imagined.